Daniel never planned to start a war with his family, but that's exactly what happened at the year-end gathering. His half-sister, Sophia, sat quietly at the table, bracing herself. Ever since she was born, she'd been treated as a stain on the family proof of their father's affair. His grandparents never accepted her, and the rest of the relatives followed their lead. That night, the pressure turned cruel. His grandfather demanded she study medicine. Sophia, her voice trembling, admitted she wanted to pursue hotel management instead. The table went cold. Disapproving stares, harsh words, and whispers filled the room. Daniel tried to defend her, reminding everyone Sophia had the right to choose her own path. But the more he spoke, the harsher his grandparents became. Finally, he'd had enough. He stood, grabbed Sophia's hand, and led her out as tears streamed down her face. The moment the doors shut, his phone exploded with calls and messages. You betrayed the family for her. She's a disgrace, and so are you. To them, Daniel was a traitor. To him, he'd simply done what nobody else had the courage to do, protect an innocent girl who had been hated for something she never chose. Still, one question haunted him. Was he really wrong for walking away? Every December, the Nguyen family gathered for what was considered the most sacred event of the year, the end-of-year reunion at the grandparents' house. It was more than just a dinner. It was a declaration of loyalty, of belonging. Anyone absent, unless gravely ill or out of the country, risked being remembered as disrespectful, even disowned. The house itself was a sprawling, two-story colonial-style home that had stood for decades, its polished wooden floors echoing with the steps of children, cousins, and relatives who rushed in from every corner of the city. Family portraits lined the walls, smiling faces captured at weddings, birthdays, and anniversaries. But there was one face that never appeared in those frames. Sophia's. Daniel, 24, entered the house with the kind of caution that came from years of experience. He had lived most of his life with his mother after his parents divorced, but still attended these gatherings out of respect. Daniel had learned to blend in, to keep his head down when old wounds were stirred at the table. His calm, measured personality often made him the peacemaker, though beneath that calm was a deep sense of fairness that sometimes pushed him into conflicts he couldn't ignore. More than anything, Daniel cared about his younger half-sister. Sophia was 22, born from his father's remarriage. She was soft-spoken and gentle, carrying a quiet kind of grace that only made the coldness of the family's treatment sting more. From the day she was born, Sophia had been marked by the scandal of her father's choices. To the grandparents, she was not simply another granddaughter. She was the living reminder of betrayal, of a marriage that had ended in shame. While other cousins were fussed over, Sophia was barely acknowledged. Her laughter was often met with silence, her presence with disapproving glances. Yet Sophia had dreams, ones that didn't fit the rigid mold the family tried to force upon her. She wanted to study hospitality management, to run hotels, to create places where people felt they belonged. It was ironic, really. She dreamed of offering others the very acceptance she was denied. But to her grandfather, this ambition was nothing short of disgraceful. Her grandfather, a stern man with sharp eyes and an iron will, believed medicine was the only respectable profession. To him, becoming a doctor wasn't just a career, it was a way to restore honor to a family name he felt Sophia had tarnished merely by existing. His word had long been law in that household. No one questioned him, not even his wife. Her grandmother, though quieter, could wound with a single remark. She often masked cruelty with civility, offering kindly advice that cut like a blade. "Some people just aren't cut out for difficult paths," she might say with a smile, her gaze lingering on Sophia until the girl's eyes dropped to her plate. Sophia endured it in silence, her shoulders shrinking as though to make herself smaller. Less visible, at the head of this uneasy balance, sat Mark, their father. Daniel's and Sophia's father. Mark had never been good at confrontation. He loved both his children in his own flawed way, but when conflict arose, he always chose silence. His parents' voices were louder, more commanding, and Mark rarely risked standing against them. Daniel often wondered if his father's silence hurt Sophia more than the insults themselves. Besides Sophia, her mother, Linda, sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She was kind, gentle, a woman who loved her daughter fiercely, but who had long since been worn down by years of disapproval. Whenever Sophia flinched at a harsh comment, Linda reached for her hand under the table, giving it a soft squeeze. It was the only shield she could offer. That night, the dining room buzzed with the usual chatter uncles, laughing over business, aunts gossiping about neighbors, cousins boasting about college acceptances. Silverware clinked against porcelain plates as servants carried out steaming dishes one after another. On the surface, it was lively, even joyful. But for Sophia, the air was suffocating. Every time her grandfather's eyes landed on her, she felt the weight of judgment pressing down. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. He sat beside her, his jaw tightening each time his grandmother made a pointed remark, each time his grandfather spoke as though Sophia wasn't even in the room. He wanted to protect her, but he also knew how dangerous it was to challenge the family here. In this house, on this night, still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The way his grandfather kept glancing at Sophia, the way the table's chatter seemed to lull before shifting toward her, was only a matter of time before her future. Her defiance of the family's expectations would be dragged into the spotlight, and when that happened, Daniel wasn't sure if he could keep sitting quietly this time. The dining room was dazzling, almost intimidating in its perfection. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, its golden light pouring down like stage lamps over the long table set for more than 20 people. The mahogany chairs, polished so well they reflected shadows, stood in perfect symmetry along the table's edge. The white linen cloth stretched across it like an unbroken sheet of snow, embroidered with patterns that only revealed themselves under the right angle of light. Every fork, knife, and porcelain plate was positioned with such precision it looked as if someone had used a ruler to align them. The food was equally elaborate: roast duck with glistening skin that cracked when cut, steaming bowls of fish soup fragrant with dill, neatly arranged spring rolls, sticky rice bound tightly in banana leaves, and trays of glossy, sugar-dusted pastries waiting at the far end. The air was thick with the smell of roasted garlic and soy, but somehow the scent didn't bring comfort. Instead, it hung over the room like a heavy curtain, one more layer to the suffocating atmosphere. At first glance, it should have been the portrait of a perfect family holiday, but the reality was different. The room, despite its elegance, carried an unmistakable weight. The silence between conversations was too sharp, too long. The laughter that broke out now and then felt hollow, like echoes in an empty hall. The uncles sat stiffly, nursing their glasses of wine, their talk circling around work promotions and real estate investments. They laughed in short bursts, each laugh slightly too loud, as if trying to convince the others of their success. Ants leaned close to each other, whispering in tones sharp enough to slice, their eyes darting occasionally to Sophia at the far end of the table. Cousins, dressed neatly as if for a job interview, listed their accomplishments on honours classes, internships, scholarships as though reading aloud from a resume. Compliments were exchanged, but they landed without warmth. Mechanical and rehearsed, Sophia sat almost invisible near the corner, her posture too careful, her movements too deliberate. She lowered her gaze and kept it there, as though the porcelain bowl in front of her was the only safe place to look. She shifted food onto her plate, tiny portions, but didn't eat much of it. Each time she lifted her chopsticks, her grandmother's sharp eyes flicked to water, and Sophia's hand faltered slightly, as if the weight of that gaze was enough to shake her composure. Grandmother's remarks came like small darts, wrapped in the softness of casual conversation but pointed enough to sting. Sit straighter, dear, you'll ruin your back. Use both hands when passing the dish. That's how a proper young lady behaves. You barely touched the soup, don't be picky. Individually. The words seemed harmless, almost trivial, but strung together, they carried a pattern, constant reminders that Sophia was under scrutiny, that she was always falling short of some invisible standard. Sophia said nothing. Her silence wasn't consent. It was armor. If she didn't respond, maybe the darts wouldn't dig as deep. Daniel, seated halfway down the table, noticed. He always noticed. He had grown used to these family dinners, to the rhythm of the night, the grandparents' dominance, the relatives' compliance, the way Sophia became a target without ever doing anything wrong. Tonight, though, it seemed worse. The room felt tighter, the pauses longer, the criticism sharper. He glanced at Sophia, who sat frozen in her seat, and felt his chest tighten. He knew if he didn't do something, she would spend the entire evening shrinking further into herself. So he leaned forward, cleared his throat, and decided to push against the heaviness in the room. Work's been crazy this week, he began with an easy smile, his voice carrying across the table. You wouldn't believe what happened in the office. One of my co-workers was rushing to deliver a report, tripped over a box of files, and sent papers flying everywhere. Looked like a snowstorm of spreadsheets. He exaggerated the motion with his hands, painting the scene with humor. A few cousins snorted before quickly stifling it. One uncle cracked a smile. An aunt gave a soft, reluctant laugh behind her hand. For a brief moment, the edges of the room softened. Daniel, encouraged, added another detail. And the best part? He tried to play it off like nothing happened, just stood up, straightened his tie, and kept walking while the papers were still raining down. Absolute Oscar-worthy performance. This time, a couple of genuine laughs broke out. Even Sophia's lips curved upward for half a second, though she immediately lowered her gaze again, but the relief was short. As quickly as it had appeared, the laughter faded. The room swallowed it whole, returning to the same brittle quiet as before. Forks scraped plates. Someone cleared their throat. Another shifted in their chair. It was as though Daniel's attempt had been acknowledged, appreciated, and then dismissed, because here, in this house, levity was temporary and control always returned to its rightful owners. Sophia risked a glance at him, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment. She didn't smile, but there was something in her look, an unspoken gratitude, a recognition that he had tried. Daniel held her gaze long enough to silently reassure her. You're not alone. I see you, and then the silence pressed down again, heavier than before. The food remained untouched on half the plates, drinks sat full. But the weight of expectation hung in the room thicker than the smell of roasted duck. This was no celebration. It was a performance, and everyone knew their lines except for Sophia, who was always cast as the outsider. The dinner had been strained from the very beginning. The long mahogany table was covered in white linen, dishes of traditional food spread out in abundance. There was laughter here and there, but it was thin, forced, and died quickly. The clinking of silverware filled the void where warm conversation should have been. Then, the sound of chopsticks being placed firmly against a porcelain dish cut through the air. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, his posture straight, his expression sharp and calculating. His voice carried over the table, low and firm. With the authority of someone used to being obeyed, "Sophia," he said, his eyes fixed on her like a spotlight, "tell me, what are your plans for college?" The question dropped like a stone in water. The chatter ended instantly. Cousins who had been whispering froze. Even the children sensed something had shifted. Every head turned toward Sophia. She froze. Her fork hovered over her plate, and her hands under the table twisted together so hard her nails dug into her palms. She could feel dozens of eyes burning into her, waiting for her answer. Sophia swallowed hard, then darted a quick glance at her father. Mark lowered his eyes to his plate, suddenly very busy cutting a piece of turkey he wasn't going to eat. Her chest tightened. She turned to her mother, Linda, who gave her hand a discreet squeeze under the table. "It's okay," her mother mouthed silently, though her eyes betrayed worry. Sophia inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Her voice came out quiet, hesitant, but every word carried her determination. I want to study hotel management, Grandpa." A heavy silence fell over the table. The air thickened. Someone dropped their fork with a faint clatter. Another relative shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Finally, one of the uncles broke the silence with a scoff. "Hotel management? Really?" he muttered, shaking his head. An aunt leaned toward her husband, whispering just loud enough for everyone to hear. "All that money for her to play around with tourists? That's not a career." Sophia's cheeks burned. She kept her eyes lowered, her fingers twisting tighter in her lap. Daniel, sitting a few seats down, leaned forward. His brows furrowed, but he stayed quiet for now, watching the storm gather. Grandpa's face hardened. He pushed his chair back slightly, his tone cutting like a blade. "Hotel management? Do you even hear yourself, Sophia? Our family produces doctors, lawyers, engineers, professions of respect. And you want to run hotels, to clean rooms, to serve drinks." Sophia's voice trembled as she tried to respond, though her words barely carried over the table. "No, Grandpa, it's not like that. It's about hospitality, management, leadership." But before she could finish, Grandma cut in with a cold, mocking laugh. "Leadership? Don't make me laugh. You're being selfish, Sophia, thinking only of yourself. Do you realize the shame this brings to the family? After everything?" The cousins began whispering again, some covering their mouths, some outright smirking. The humiliation pressed down heavier with every second. Sophia's eyes grew glassy, her throat tight. She tried once more, her voice cracking. "It's my dream. I just want a chance." But Grandpa slammed his palm on the table, silencing her completely. Dreams don't matter when the family's honor is at stake. The table remained frozen in silence, the only sound the faint tremble of Sophia's breath. Daniel clenched his fists under the table, his patience wearing thin as he watched his sister slowly crumble under the weight of their judgment. The holiday dinner had already been stiff, every smile forced and every laugh sounding hollow. But the tension reached a breaking point when Grandpa slammed his hand down on the table, the sharp clatter of plates and chopsticks reverberating through the room. It wasn't just noise, it was a declaration, a warning that the calm, strained atmosphere was over. Hotel management. Do you even know what that is? Grandpa's voice boomed, carrying authority and fury. It's nothing but a fancy word for waiting tables. Do you understand the disgrace it brings to this family? You will study medicine. You will become a doctor. That's the only way to honor our name and uphold the legacy of this house. Grandma immediately joined in, her tone sharp, cold, and mocking. This girl has always thought only of herself. She never considers the family, never sacrifices. Selfishness runs in her blood. Sophia shrank in her chair, her hands clenched tightly under the table until her knuckles were white. Her voice trembled as she attempted to respond. I don't want to be a doctor. I want to study hotel management. It's my dream. I think I can do something different, something I'm passionate about. Grandpa's eyes narrowed, cutting her off like a blade. Dreams don't matter. You have a duty to this family. We don't raise children for nonsense like this. Grandma's mocking tone intensified, her gaze sweeping across the relatives seated around the table, as if to rally their agreement. Look around you, child. Does anyone here support you? Everyone is embarrassed for your childish thinking. Have you ever thought of your parents, your grandparents, or do you only care about yourself? An uncle scoffed, shaking his head in disdain. Hotel management. So she wants to serve drinks to rich people. That's her future. A cousin snickered, adding, waste of money, waste of effort. This family has raised another disappointment. The room seemed to close in on Sophia. Each whispered comment, each sideways glance, each barely concealed smirk pressed against her like a wall. She felt trapped, small, suffocated. She tried once more, lifting her chin slightly, attempting to stand for herself. But I don't want someone else to decide my life. I just want a chance to follow my dreams. Grandpa's palm hit the table again, louder this time, silencing her instantly. Silence. One more word, and you might as well consider yourself no longer part of this family. Sophia's lips quivered, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She lowered her gaze, shoulders trembling, feeling every ounce of judgment weigh her down. The room that should have been warm with family cheer had transformed into a tribunal, and she was the accused. Daniel, sitting nearby, felt a surge of anger and helplessness. He had tried earlier to lighten the mood, telling a few small stories to ease the tension, but now all attempts at calm were crushed. Watching his sister shrink under the relentless criticism made his chest tighten. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides. Every harsh word, every sneer, every muttered insult from cousins and aunts struck like knives. Enough, Daniel finally muttered under his breath, the tension coiling in his stomach like a spring ready to snap. Grandpa's gaze flicked to him, sharp as a hawk. And what are you saying, Daniel? Are you defending this nonsense too? Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on Sophia. Yes, I am. Sophia's dream is not nonsense. She has the right to follow her own path. You're treating her like she's the problem when all she's done is be herself. The room went dead silent. Every head turned toward Daniel, some in shock, others in fury. Grandpa's face darkened. Grandma's lips curled in disdain. The whispers grew into murmurs of anger and disbelief. Sophia, hearing Daniel speak up, felt a tiny spark of hope. She looked at her brother with wide, tear-filled eyes, feeling that maybe she wasn't completely alone. The storm of criticism was still around them, but now there was someone shielding her from the full force of it. Daniel took a deep breath. Standing up from his chair scraping loudly against the floor, breaking the thick silence, "I'm not going to watch you tear her apart anymore. Sophia, come with me." Sophia hesitated, looking at the stern, disapproving faces of their grandparents. But Daniel extended his hand, and with trembling fingers, she took it. As Daniel guided her away from the table, tears streamed down her face. Whispers and exclamations followed them, but he ignored it all. In that moment, protecting his sister was all that mattered. Daniel carefully guided Sophia out of the stifling, tension-filled house, leaving behind the angry voices, sharp glares, and the relentless buzzing of phones filled with calls and messages from family members. The cold night air hit them like a cleansing wave, brushing away the suffocating atmosphere they had just escaped. Daniel opened the car door, helping Sophia in gently, holding her hand firmly to steady her trembling steps. Every motion carried the weight of the confrontation they had just endured, the tension lingering in their bodies like a heavy cloak once inside the car. Sophia collapsed into her seat, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook violently as sobs poured out uncontrollably, tears soaking through her coat. These weren't just tears of sadness. They were the long-suppressed anguish of years spent feeling invisible, unloved, and rejected by her own family. Every comment, every glance of disdain, every whisper of judgment she had endured suddenly erupted in an overwhelming wave of emotion. I can't believe you actually stood up for me," Sophia whispered between sobs, her voice breaking. I've never had anyone defend me like this before." Daniel reached over, placing a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder, squeezing reassuringly. His voice was steady, calm, and full of conviction. "Sophia, you have the right to your dreams, and no one has the right to take them away. You won't face this alone, not now, not ever. I'll always be here for you, no matter what anyone says or does." Sophia raised her tear-streaked face, looking at him with wide eyes filled with a mixture of relief and deep gratitude. For the first time, she truly felt seen, valued, and protected. The love and determination radiating from Daniel was a shield she had longed for her entire life, a protective barrier against the judgment and cruelty she had endured from their family. Her tears, though still flowing, were tinged with a newfound sense of safety and reassurance. "I don't even know how to thank you," Sophia said softly, her voice trembling. No one has ever stood up for me like this. Thank you." For believing in me, Daniel kept his eyes on the road, though his mind raced with the events that had just unfolded. He knew that while they had left the house, the confrontation wasn't over, and the family's resentment and prejudice wouldn't vanish overnight. But for this moment, Sophia had a safe place, someone who would support and protect her without question. He silently vowed that he would never let her feel abandoned or powerless again. As the car glided through the quiet streets, the soft rhythm of the tires on the asphalt mingled with Sophia's gentle sobs, creating a strange but comforting cadence. The interior of the car, though quiet, felt warm and intimate, small sanctuary in a world that had often seemed harsh and unwelcoming. For the first time in her life, Sophia realized that she was not alone, that someone truly believed in her, and that she had a right to her own path. Free from judgment, Daniel's hand gently brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. His tone soft yet firm. "You are allowed to dream, Sophia. You are allowed to live the life you want, and I'll be with you every step of the way. You don't have to fear anyone or anything, because I won't let anyone hurt you or make you feel less than you are." Sophia managed a small, tearful smile, her eyes still glistening but brighter now, reflecting a mixture of relief, trust, and hope. In that moment, a shift occurred not just in the dynamic between her and Daniel, but in how she saw herself. She was no longer merely the problem or the shame of the family. She was a young woman with dreams, with the right to be respected and protected, and with a brother who would go to the ends of the earth to ensure her safety and happiness. The ride continued in near silence. But it was a silence filled with understanding and mutual reassurance. Sophia's sobs gradually softened, replaced by quiet sniffles and occasional shaky breaths. Daniel's mind, however, was far from calm. He reflected deeply on the confrontation, the anger and rigidity of their grandparents, and the injustice of it all. Yet, in the quiet of the car, he felt a spark of hope. Hope that one day, Sophia might be fully accepted, that she could pursue her dreams freely, and that the bond between them could help bridge the gap, created by prejudice and resentment, by the time they reached their home. Sophia had regained some composure, though her hand still trembled slightly as she held Daniel's. She looked at him, eyes shining with gratitude and relief. I don't know what I would have done without you today." Daniel smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and resolve in his expression. "You'll never have to find out. From now on, we face everything together. And if anyone can't accept you for who you are, that's their problem, not yours." For Sophia, the night had transformed from one of dread and humiliation into a moment of validation, courage, and love. For Daniel, it was a reaffirmation of his role as protector and advocate, a reminder the family isn't just defined by blood, but by those willing to stand up for one another in the toughest moments. The car moved slowly through the quiet streets, the tires humming softly against the asphalt. The night was cold, but inside, the air was thick with the lingering tension of what had just occurred. Sophia sat in the back seat, still trembling, her hands pressed to her face as small, shaky sobs escaped her. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, hands gripping the wheel, yet his mind was far from driving. His thoughts spun relentlessly, a storm of emotions he couldn't quiet. He felt anger at his grandparents' unyielding rigidity, at their harsh, cutting words, and at the generations of pride and prejudice that had shaped them. But mingled with that anger was a deep, gnawing worry for Sophia. How could he keep her safe in a family that refused to see her for who she truly was? How could he make them understand that she wasn't a symbol of her father's mistakes, but a person with her own ambitions, her own dreams, her own worth? He whispered softly to himself, a vow more than a question. There has to be a way to make them see Sophia as a human being, not a mistake, not a shame. There has to be a way for them to accept her, truly accept her, as part of this family. Daniel knew well that this would not be an overnight process. The stubbornness of tradition, the weight of expectations, and the deep-seated biases of his grandparents had been built over decades. Changing them would be slow, painstaking work. But he also knew that today, he had taken the first step. By standing up for Sophia, he had shown her that she wasn't alone, that someone believed in her, that she had a defender in a house that had long ignored or mistreated her as he drove. Daniel began to think in practical terms. He visualized small steps, manageable strategies to chip away at the wall of resentment. Perhaps inviting Sophia to more family gatherings, allowing her to contribute, show her strengths, her intelligence, her warmth. Perhaps giving them moments to witness her kindness or dedication, letting actions speak louder than words. Maybe over time, they could see that she was not selfish, not lazy, not a threat, but a capable, kind, an ambitious young woman. He considered conversations, carefully planned and gentle, aiming to educate and humanize Sophia in the eyes of his grandparents. One-on-one talks, patient explanations, showing them the depth of her character. Maybe, eventually, her achievements would speak for themselves, and grudges would start to soften. Daniel even imagined situations where they would be forced to witness her successes, her confidence, her compassion, and how that might slowly shift their perception. The longer he drove, the heavier the responsibility felt, but also the firmer his determination grew. He would not allow Sophia to be marginalized any longer. He would be her shield, her advocate, and her guide. He would defend her, patiently and persistently, until the family could see her as she truly was, not a reflection of past mistakes, but a person with intrinsic worth. Daniel glanced at the rearview mirror, catching sight of Sophia's tear-streaked face. Though still damp with sorrow, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. That fragile glimmer was enough to fuel his resolve. He whispered again, more to himself than to her, "You are allowed to dream, Sophia. You are allowed to live your life freely, and I will be with you every step of the way. No one can make you feel less than you are, not now, not ever." He reflected on the months, maybe years, ahead. There would be setbacks, anger, dismissiveness, maybe outright refusal. Yet he was willing to persist. He imagined gently guiding Sophia, helping her prove her worth, showing the family the truth of her character little by little. With patience, he could slowly open their hearts. Perhaps one day, the same grandparents who had been harsh and dismissive would acknowledge her accomplishments, her courage, and the strength of her character. Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened, a mix of exhaustion and unwavering determination written across his face. Tonight had been just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and resistance, but he was ready. The spark of hope, however faint, burned steadily in him. Sophia deserved to be seen, loved, and respected, and he would do everything in his power to make sure that day came. The silence in the car was profound, yet not oppressive. It was contemplative, reflective, filled with the shared understanding of two people bound by blood and loyalty. Sophia's sobs had quieted into soft, lingering sniffles, and Daniel allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He knew that while the confrontation had ended for tonight, the true work changing hearts and minds was only beginning. Finally, as the familiar streets of their neighborhood appeared, Daniel spoke softly to Sophia, his voice steady and reassuring. "We'll take it one step at a time. We'll face everything together. And if anyone can't accept you for who you are, well, that's their problem, not yours." Sophia managed a small, tearful smile, and in that moment, Daniel felt a surge of purpose and hope. He was no longer just a brother, he was a protector, a guide, and a bridge toward a future where Sophia could be truly recognized, loved, and valued. Tonight had planted the first seed of change, and Daniel vowed to nurture it, no matter how long it took. After dropping Sophia off at her home, Daniel sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across his tired face. The house was quiet, but inside him a storm of thoughts and emotions raged. He wondered whether he had been too extreme, skipping the entire family's year-end gathering, defying grandparents, aunts, and uncles, just to stand by Sophia, his half-sister, the one everyone in the family seemed determined to reject. He recalled every piercing glance, every cutting remark, every whisper that had filled the dining room that night. His grandparents had been rigid and unyielding, blind to Sophia's feelings, blind to her aspirations. She had never chosen the circumstances of her birth, yet she bore the brunt of scorn and disapproval, punished for the mistakes of others. Daniel couldn't help but feel a mixture of sadness and anger, sadness for Sophia's suffering, and anger at a family that seemed incapable of empathy or fairness. Yet beneath the storm, there was also a quiet pride. Daniel had stood up, despite the risk of being labeled disrespectful or disobedient. He had defended Sophia, asserting that her dreams were valid and her dignity deserved protection. He had refused to bow to the weight of tradition or the judgment of others. In doing so, he had preserved something more important than appearances, his own integrity and the bond of trust and love with his sister. As he stared out the window at the darkened streets, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, Daniel realized that losing the perfect grandson image in the eyes of his family was not a defeat. In fact, it was a kind of victory, the victory of conscience, of doing what was right, even when it was unpopular. He had chosen love over obedience, empathy over convenience, and in that choice, he had planted the seeds for change. Questions swirled in his mind, heavy and insistent. Was it really wrong to protect someone innocent? To stand for fairness, even if it meant clashing with the people who were supposed to love him? Could he somehow bridge the gap, showing the family that Sophia was not a symbol of shame, but a human being with her own dreams, her own ambitions, and her own worth? Would they ever be able to look at her without judgment, without resentment, without the invisible chains of old grudges? Daniel let out a slow breath, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. He knew that change would be gradual, that prejudices and old habits could not be erased overnight. But tonight had been a first stepper, decisive step that showed Sophia she was not alone, that someone in her family would always stand by her, protect her, and champion her dreams. He envisioned the road ahead, patient conversations, careful guidance, moments where Sophia could shine, allowing her character, her competence, and her integrity to speak louder than bias. It would be long and difficult, filled with setbacks, skepticism, and resistance. Yet even imagining it brought a flicker of hope. One day, perhaps, the same relatives who had been cold and dismissive might see her in a new light, acknowledging her courage, her talent, and the goodness in her heart. Daniel's grip tightened on the armrest as he contemplated the future. He would not let Sophia suffer or feel isolated again. He would be her shield, her voice, her unwavering support. Each small action, each word spoken, would be a step toward reconciliation, not for his own sake, but for hers. He knew he couldn't change the past, and the family's grudges could not be undone overnight. But he could create a present in which Sophia felt valued, seen, and loved, and a future where perhaps those walls of prejudice would finally crumble. Finally, he allowed himself a moment to glance in the rearview mirror. picturing Sophia's tear-streaked face softened by a fragile sense of relief and gratitude. That small spark of hope was enough to remind him why every struggle, every confrontation, every risk taken tonight had been worthwhile. Softly, he whispered to himself, "I won't let anyone make you feel less than you are, Sophia. Not now, not ever. We'll face this together, one step at a time. And someday they will see you the way you deserve to be seen." The night stretched on, the streets quiet around them. The car moved forward, carrying both siblings through the darkness, but toward a future where, slowly but surely, hope and justice might finally reach the heart of the family. Though the path was uncertain, Daniel's resolve burned steadily. Sophia would never face the world alone again, and he would do everything in his power to ensure that she was recognized, respected, and loved.